Hello again, it's Colin at OpenROV HQ, and now, finally, we are going to assemble the ROV fully. So this should be the last step before booting up. Now, so let's take, so in the last step you had taught you how to seal up the end caps and make a nice seal on the electronics tube. So now, what we're going to do is install the electronics tube, the E-chassis into electronics tube. So let's take your tube, and let's first stick it on, the solo end cap really quick. So this, make sure when you're assembling these end caps, you're very careful to make sure that since the Teflon is kind of fragile on the sides, you don't want to like go at an angle. You want to hit it straight on and then kind of push on once you have it lined up nicely. Cool. So now let's take your E-chassis and let's plug it in. So let's take your E-chassis again. The Molex cables, just kind of recommend holding the Molex cable, the Molex connector itself, and then just snap it right in. So again, sometimes it might pop out on you. So once it's snapped in, it'll be snapped in once you typically hear snap, and also you want to make sure that the top latch is latched in right there. Then you want to install it into the tube. So let's take the tube. So now here's kind of where it's a little important to notice the direction. If you notice, the end caps are not perfectly circular. There's a small notch cut out. That little flat notch is designed such that that's supposed to be facing the bottom, because when the tube kind of rests in its setting place, the end cap actually comes in contact with the battery tube. So that flat piece lets the the electronics tube sit up flush against the battery tube without interfering too much. So again, let's install and assemble the tube. Again, at the same time, you want to notice that, so this where the kind of thick cable exits the end cap, you want that pointing in the upper left corner, like pointing up there. So if this is the bottom, you want the camera should be facing forward towards you. And then just make sure that the notch on this end cap, when you assemble it over, matches. So again, when you stick this tube over the E-chassis, again, kind of slide it around. Make sure that it's not intersecting with any components. Sometimes you want to make sure you push in wires and such, and make sure that they don't intersect. Again, so make sure all your wires aren't actually rubbing against the tube itself. So it might snag in some things. Just be careful. Lower. Don't force it on. Just make sure. You can see this purple wire kind of hanging out. Stuff it in that little notch where it can kind of sit in without intersecting with the tube. Just kind of turn it and wiggle it down so that it should just slide right on. So there we go. Oop. There's one thing that's catching. Oh, there it is. Okay, awesome. So now that you have that, again, make sure that you align that bottom notch towards the bottom. I actually recommend kind of pointing the camera not just straight forward, but a little bit down. Reason being is that you typically are more interested in what's below you than what's above you. And typically you want to be able to see what's below you right there. So kind of angle it down a little bit and just make sure that the tube matches up. And then, yep, just grab the tube, other side. Just kind of make sure that, yep, and it should sit right in. So that should be your assembled E-chassis tube. So now the next step is to, there's first this test fit it. I'm going to shoot the next video because I need to find the end plungers. But if you notice that in the end caps, use the little syringe, and you need to actually have the syringe stopper. Hopefully you didn't throw it away. You need that to be able to plug that hole. This hole is really useful for when you're assembling the E-chassis tube. Oftentimes it's kind of difficult to press together. So when you're putting it together, that's one thing I forgot to note. When you're pushing the end caps together, you kind of want to at least pull one of these out to let the air expel when you're displacing that volume. And then once you have it assembled, then you can put them back in. So first, I'm going to show you how to make test the fit and make sure that this all kind of fits together. So let's kind of push it over. Again, oftentimes it might be a little bit of a tight fit, so just kind of wiggle it around. Again, don't force it in. So the thing is, if you notice, this cable in the back needs to be pointed to the top. So if you kind of rotate it upwards, oftentimes you'll notice that if you rotate it up like at a diagonal, you can get a little bit more distance than you would expect typically. And then that should just catch right in. And there you have it. So it fits, which is awesome. So again, the next thing is that you want to be able to, so how does this, again, probably asking, how does this tube kind of attach? So that's why you have these long O-rings. So these long O-rings kind of strap around I guess electronics tube and keep that in place. So what we want to do is again, just take this out really quick, just set it down. Oops, oh no, it's popping out. Make sure that that internal structure, again, actually you're probably going to need to tighten the chassis to make sure that it holds in nicely. So you want to take this and pop it. Let me just show you kind of right where. So right here in the back, there's that hook right here, and there's a hook right there. So you want to keep this hooked in the back. So if you kind of route it around that notch, you can't really see it terribly well, but if you put it in the notch and then you pull on it, it should snap right in. So let's do that for both the sides. So we snap right in. Oop, that was the wrong snap sound. So let's kind of snap it in. Let's kind of pull on that. Kind of adjust the camera. And those will serve as the O-ring holders. You can kind of help it by pushing it in the back a little, make sure it sits into that. We'll hold that securely in place. Okay, so the next step we can do also, before we finally assemble everything, is grab your assembled propeller motor bell thingamajig bobbers, that's what I'm going to call them, thingamajig bobbers, and take them and then put them on each of the motors. So let's do the vertical. Again, when you're inserting these, kind of, there's two bearings that support the shaft, and the rear bearing, oftentimes you can feel it. It's like once the magnets engage, it really wants to yank it down. So don't let go, because if it's not aligned, that shaft will actually hit the other bearing, and since the other bearing is only it's just press fit seated, you might knock that bearing out, and then it's not like it's broken or anything. You see, it's kind of a pain to unscrew off the motor mount and then make sure to, and then repress the bearing back in its seat. So make sure that kind of just guide it in, wiggle it around until you can feel it, kind of the shaft engaging with the other bearing, and then let it go all the way. So let it snap in. Again, just be gentle. Turn this around to show you again. So again, for these, same thing. Just kind of grab it, let it set in, but then make sure that it sets in the second bearing. Again, you can always tell it's spinning happily, that it's nice and happy. It's good, it's a good fit. Cool. There it is, it's a nice fit. So they're all spinning happily. Cool. So now we know that all the motors are pretty happy, and that you have your tube assembled. Okay. So again, this is just a check. So what you also want to do is take this entire thing and flip it over really quick. Flip it all upside down. So you kind of have a fair bit amount of wires and cabling all running over in the back. If you notice, when the motor runs, you have these wires that kind of loose hanging around that might actually get stuck in the propeller itself, especially with the tether wire. It's coming off the back, it's all loose and whatnot. So if in your ESC, with your ESCs, you should receive 2 zip ties in every single one of the ESC box. Hopefully you saved them. If not, any zip ties or some sort of tie downs will work. But we're just going to grab a few of these that came with your ESCs, and we'll use these small black zip ties to tie down and kind of hard mount all those wires to make sure that they don't get rubbed up against those motors or to get stuck in the prop itself. So what I like to do, again, because everything might actually get in the way a bit, the props might get in the way a bit, just pull off these two rear props, and that way we can make it easier to access that ESC. So what I recommend is that you kind of do this as two separate rails. Sorry, the camera's totally not pointing that direction. You kind of do this as two separate little two separate little parts. So you take so there's the pair of wires that are going to the port battery tube. You want to zip tie. I like zip tying this wire down to the top of the support right there. And then for the others, I like to wrap them around and below, or I guess relatively above, and then zip tie them from this side, and then also finally zip tie the tether to right about here as a strain relief. So that way you're not actually pulling on the tether when it's reaching the potty. So let's grab the small zip tie, and let's just do this top one really quick. It's the zip tie down the port battery pack wires. So it should be pretty simple and straightforward. Just grab small zip tie. Again, this helps to have small hands. Definitely helpful. And then grab your flush cutter, or whatever cutter you might have, and just pop that off. There we go. That is nice and happy. It's not going to get sucked into the propeller, and it's out of the way. So the trickier one is that is the tether wire, because it's kind of wrapped up below. So what I recommend doing is doing 2 zip ties, one right here. Let's see, up and over right here. This is kind of difficult to see. Hopefully, difficult to see right there. So over this little support right through there, and just zip tie that down. Come on, get in that hole. Small zip tie. You can do it. There it is. Awesome. There it is. There's one. Okay. And also, another thing is that, let me show you really quick. So with all this shrink tubing shrink tubing to make sure that when you soldered on the motors onto the 18-gauge wire, you have a bunch of shrink tubing protecting that waterproof, watertight seal around the solder. So sometimes, since that heat shrink tubing is a little wide, when you put the motors in, not in this case, but if it's sometimes a little poked out, you can see the motor belt actually might rub up against that heat shrink tubing. So sometimes it's not, sometimes you have clearance, but sometimes if you don't have clearance, you can take those small zip ties and zip tie that wire lead right next to the motor against one of the supports in the internal structure to kind of pull that away from that motor belt. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's not. It's kind of your mileage may vary with this specific thing. Sometimes it really depends on, it's just, and there's a lot of variables in the assembly itself. So in this case, I don't have to do for that motor. But let's get one more zip tie onto the tether. So I recommend for the final zip tie to hold the tether right here. So if you notice, there's this hole right here perfectly for that zip tie, which is why it's there. You want to use a thicker zip tie to kind of hold more strength. We didn't necessarily ship you with one, but you could also use a small zip tie as they probably have sufficient force. And we have these also this nice thicker 15-pound zip ties, I believe, or maybe it might be more. And just kind of go up against that and just crimp down hard against that zip, hard against it, to really kind of provide that strain relief. Awesome. So let's clip that. Let's clip that other small zip tie, and there you go. So we have all those nice zip tied up. Now let's. Oops, sorry about that. I don't want to move too much, or the camera might go falling off my neck. Let's put those motor bells back on. Again, wiggle it around so you don't offset those bearings. You go and try to give them a spin and make sure that they've seated correctly. Next one as well. And there you go. There you have it, all 3. So in the next video, I'll show you the final, verifying your seal, and then finally getting the batteries in and tossing it in the water.